This is Walter Bosley, and I welcome you here to the Walter Bosley channel. I wanted to talk a little bit about the fascinating and curious chthonic goddess named Hekate. If you're familiar with my work and with interviews that I've done and discussions here at the channel, you know very well that Hekate factors largely in my research. I have demonstrated how she, along with the Tuatha De Danann, seem to emerge and play some role to varying degrees in everything I've researched. It's kind of strange. It's been a bizarre experience, I can tell you that. I have gone into several books not looking for her and thinking, well, maybe this will be the one where she doesn't emerge at all. And lo and behold, there she will be. So yes, I have talked about her a lot, and I will continue to do so because it's all part of the mystery that I've stumbled into. Now, those of you not familiar with my books, I have written on a few different topics. Written a book about the esoteric engineering of Disneyland. Of course, Empire of the Wheel is a trilogy specifically spinning out of my stumbling onto what appears, in my opinion, to have been a serial murder, potentially serial ritual murder case in San Bernardino in 1915. All thanks to talking to a librarian here named Ann Walker about a ghost story that I had read on the internet. And she urged me to dive into the mystery of a woman named Cora Stanton. Well, if you've read my books or heard me talk about it, I certainly did that. I found a lot more, and I even proposed that I know who Cora Stanton really was. That is, that I'm pretty confident that I've uncovered her true identity. And then, of course, there's the Secret Missions series, which is about individuals I've selected from history who have a few things in common, one of which is their involvement with the search for, well, I guess you'd say, forgotten technology of lost civilizations. But they also have in common Hekate, somewhere in the mix of their exploits. And I'm going to be talking specifically about those Secret Missions books today, but I've also written a book about my dad's really odd experience in the Air Force, his version of events, what its connection to Roswell allegedly was. I've written a book on the airship mystery of the 19th century, leading into breakaway civilization discussion, or breakaway group as I like to say now, in the 20th century. And each time I think I'm going in a different direction with something I've written, as I said in the past, Hekate will pop up. So let's jump into Secret Missions 1. What led to the apparent appearance of Hekate in the Mystery and Secret Missions 1 was the main figure's connection to Catalina Island. That's what first sparked the connection. Now, Secret Missions 1 is fully titled Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California, and it's very specifically about the mystery of Juan Cabrillo. Now, the mystery is of his birth and his death, because while we are told Juan Cabrillo died, and how he died, although there were 3 different versions from the very witnesses who were there, his body has never been found, and he left a big mystery behind. And he is connected to the island that we call Catalina Island. Catalina is one of the California Channel Islands, and some people say that he died there, but again, no grave, no bones, nothing. No shred of evidence of his death has ever been found there. And in my research on Catalina, I discovered that the island as such, as Catalina, the oldest version of how the island was named that I could find stated that it was named after Saint Catherine of Alexandria. If you've followed my research, if you've read the Empire of the Wheel books, you will also know that Saint Catherine of Alexandria never actually existed. She was a syncretic character, you could say. Syncretic meaning the church, the early church, borrowed her from the very historical woman who actually lived, is what I mean by that, and well documented, Hypatia of Alexandria. You see, the church took part of her biography and then they wove in some fakery, all to bring the obvious and well-known aspects of the goddess Hekate into the syncretic fold, to give her kind of a what became a Roman Catholic veneer, so to speak. And I'm of the opinion, like as are many others, like many other researchers in particular, I'm of the opinion that the church would do this when they realized they couldn't quite erase particular traditions. And I think that's why this St. Catherine of Alexandria, or St. Catherine of the Wheel, was concocted. They knew they couldn't get rid of the interest in and the veneration of Hekate. Now, the church even admits this. If you go to, I believe, the New Catholic Encyclopedia, I reference the specific page number and such in Empire of the Wheel 1. Rick and I both looked over the material, and we concurred that this is indeed what they did, and they even state in their own literature, the Catholic Church does, that St. Catherine of Alexandria was not an historical figure. And in fact, my understanding, my most recent read on the material and my understanding is that her feast days have been kind of, unofficialized, so to speak. They're not necessarily maintained, kept, or celebrated. So there's the church itself admitting that there was no historical St. Catherine of Alexandria. You can point to monasteries all you want, and you can point to churches, and as Empire of the Wheel points out, Rick and I presented with photos, there is a St. Catherine of Alexandria church in Riverside, California, right over here, about 15 minutes from where I live. But you can point to all the churches and the monasteries all you want. St. Catherine of Alexandria never existed. She is a syncretic creation to mask the goddess Hekate. So, go to Empire of the Wheel 1, to read more about that. So I wondered, in researching the mystery of Juan Cabrillo, I wondered if there could be any significance in the fact that the island so connected with his life and alleged death was named after her. There she is, emerging in that way in the Cabrillo story. Now, you have to understand that the Secret Missions series, I didn't intend to write a series of books. In fact, I didn't write the first Secret Missions book, Hidden Legacy of Old California, until after I'd finished Volume 3 of the Empire of the Wheel series. Now, this is where things get a little weird, because you've heard me say it, and I will talk about it more and more. All of this was after I did the Disneyland book, after I researched it and shortly before I published it. I had started dabbling in remote viewing. Of course, you might have heard me discuss the story of the complete stranger who gave me a call one afternoon, and we spent several hours on the phone, and that resulted in him deciding to send me, or informing me that he wanted to send me materials to learn a version of remote viewing. And I had the materials for a few months, most of the summer. This was in 2007. Before I really gave it a serious try. I had distractions that summer. My father was assaulted by a former employee that summer. Spent the last 11 months of his life in the hospital. He died the following summer as a result of the assault. So for about half of that summer, he was in a coma. So I was a little distracted with some real life stuff going on. There was that, and there was some other drama going on. But late in summer, going into September, I pulled the materials out and I jumped in. And what began to emerge was symbolism pointing to ultimately Joan of Arc, Templars, a lot of Arthurian symbolism. And then Cabrillo-related stuff. Juan Cabrillo. But mostly it was the Arthurian, the very esoteric symbolism, and things that ultimately related to Joan of Arc. And between September and December of 2007, I was experiencing little discoveries in this area where I live, the Inland Empire, specifically in Riverside, relative to the remote viewing and Magdalene symbolism and Mary symbolism, specifically Mary and Christ symbolism. It, you know, you could say that it kind of had sort of that gosh darn it, the Dan Brown vibe to it, with you know, the idea of Christ and Magdalene, and there was some duality between the symbolism of Arthur and Guinevere, and Christ and Mary Magdalene, and you know, a lot of Da Vinci Code-esque, you know, Priory of Sion type, you know, Rennes-le-Chateau type stuff going on. Now remember, this is all before I talked to Ann Walker, the librarian, and learned about Cora Stanton, because that in itself had a bunch of associated symbolism. But the things I was remote viewing, the things that were emerging through the remote viewing, were leading me toward this, okay? And in December of that year, you've heard me talk about the incident, the episode of going over to the Citrus Historical Park in Riverside. And at that time, I didn't really know about Hekate. I only was becoming familiar with St. Catherine of Alexandria. And so you've heard me tell the story about being at the Citrus Historical Park. This was in December of 2007. And this was after I had gone to San Francisco and visited certain current sites with Secherie, after I had had waking visions of San Francisco burning in 1906 as I stood on Indian Rock in 2007, and then getting the download of imagery, you know, from the past. And I had gone to an antique shop in Riverside that's not there anymore, by the way, called the Crystal Antique Shop. And think of Merlin the magician. He was imprisoned in the Crystal Cave, the Crystal Cavern. And at this antique store, it was just loaded left and right. Every floor I went to, every section I went to, there was Arthur and Guinevere symbolism. There at one point was, you know, Mary and Christ, and, you know, Mary and child type of symbolism. And one of the things there was a painting of a woman that was right out of one of the waking visions I had had in San Francisco. A woman in a white dress, and in the vision I saw the woman just like from the painting, but in the vision it wasn't a painting. It was a live, living woman. Her face was somewhat obscured. Her hair was red, and it was from, you know, I'm assuming 1906, just because of the context of all the things that had gone on while I was up there, and by the appearance of her clothing, her dress. And she was walking along a well-tended walkway where there was a well-tended manicured lawn right next to it, and it had the feeling of a park. And pretty much in retrospect, it's just like that area that was around the where the Palace of Fine Arts would be built for the 1915 event 9 years later, after 1906. But it was in, you know, like where the park is in San Francisco, that kind of area. And there was this painting in the antique shop there in Riverside that it looked just like the woman in this waking vision. So that was going on. And also, if you've taken the Empire of the Wheel tour, among those of you who have done that, and I do give that tour if you're interested, the clock tower with the round clock face atop the isosceles triangle. Well, that image of the circle atop an isosceles triangle, that emerged from a remote viewing that I had done. And after doing that remote viewing, not being sure what that meant, I was working. I had a contract job then for the federal government doing background investigations, and I had to go to City Hall, and I hadn't been there ever before that I could remember. So I walked from the old courthouse built in 1903 and emerged from under the trees, and there's the clock tower with the circle with the isosceles triangle, and I could talk for an hour just on that. I'm just mentioning it here to give you the context of what was going on with me for a period of a few months at that time. The remote viewing was very intense. I was doing it every day, and I was getting, astonishing results. And I was remote viewing things that subsequently I would find. So it was pretty startling. It spooked the few folks that I demonstrated it for, just to see if I was nuts or if I was interpreting this right. And anyway, so that was going on leading up to the trip to San Francisco, and then the decision to go to the State Citrus Historical Park was at Sechery's request, because he had done telluric analysis, ley lines, so to speak, analysis. This was early in his analysis of the Inland Empire, which would and is prominently discussed in the Empire of the Wheel books. So he asked me to go to the State Citrus Historical Park in Riverside. For those of you not familiar with the Inland Empire, Southern California, particularly the San Bernardino Valley and Riverside and out into the Pomona Valley and such, this used to be the citrus capital of the United States for a time, and specifically where navel oranges were first cultivated in the United States. In fact, the parent navel orange tree, from which all navel oranges leading up to today, if you get navel oranges grown anywhere in the United States, primarily that would be California, or I think Florida might grow them now, those are all descended from the parent navel orange tree that is in Riverside, California, and it's protected. It's got a fence around it, and it was a gift to Riverside, one of the family growers from Brazil, I believe. It's from South America, I believe, from Brazil, because they had the navel orange tree down there. And then, of course, it was further developed. The navel oranges that we as Southern Californians, my generation, such, have grown up with, and that you get today, these are the evolved version of the navel orange that really skyrocketed after the tree was brought to the Inland Empire. So there's a lot of citrus history here. It's a big-time part of the historical tradition here in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, Riverside, and such, the surrounding areas. There are still a few remaining orange groves, but when I was growing up, there were a lot more orange groves around, and it was much more prominent. The two biggest industries here, and they went hand in hand, so this is why they're the two, was the citrus industry and, of course, the railroad. The railroad, this is a major hub, and it has been for well over 100 years. And, of course, anytime you're in the agricultural industry, you need to transport that, right? So it's no wonder that the railroad, has such a big imprint here. So I went over to the State Historical Citrus Park. I always get the words not in the right order. And visited it. Took a little walk around. There was hardly anyone there. It was interesting. It's like, I believe it was a Wednesday. Yeah, it was a Wednesday. It was the Wednesday before Christmas of that year. And I sat down on a bench in the little rose garden there. And by this time I had been reading about St. Catherine of Alexandria because of a specific remote viewing I had done. I'll have to look at the exact date again, because wouldn't it be something if the date on that reading was November 19th? I mean, between the significance of that day with Empire of the Wheel and it being a feast day for Hekate, it'd be interesting to go back and look and see if that was the date, November 19th, that I had done that viewing. But what emerged from that viewing is something that I hadn't really talked about till very recently. I was holding it close to vest for years, and that's a glyph. Essentially, a glyph was the result of this one particular RV session I had done. A glyph being a symbol, of course. When you do remote viewing, the result is ultimately a sketch and a short couple of sentences, short description of what you think the target is, what you think you're viewing, so to speak. And this glyph made it easy to find St. Catherine of Alexandria. And I've shown the glyph. It's in my journal. I've shown it very recently. It was a butterfly connected to an axe head, a blade, beneath it. And then connected to that, at the bottom, was a spinning wheel. Now, imagine a butterfly. Now, here's what's interesting. The butterfly, for some reason, I drew it on its side. And it's like a butterfly is perched on top of a rod, and connected at the other end of the rod below the butterfly is the blade. And then another rod comes out of the blade and connects to a spinning wheel, a rotating wheel below that. So we had a butterfly, a blade, and a wheel. So when I did a search on butterfly, blade, and wheel, what popped up was this phrase that I had never heard before that day, and that was breaking a butterfly on a wheel. And it has to do with overkill and, such. I think there's like a song somebody's done. I don't know if it's Tool or whatever, or whoever, but anyway, that leads you to the faux biography of St. Catherine of Alexandria, or St. Catherine of the Wheel. Now, the minute that I got into the alleged biography of this St. Catherine of the Wheel, I recognized Hypatia's story. I mean, it's such a blatant ripoff, okay, that anybody who is familiar with Hypatia of Alexandria, who was the daughter of the gentleman who was the librarian of Alexandria, if you will, the man who at that time was the head guy in charge of the library, the great library of Alexandria. His daughter, he had raised her not typically. She had received, from him and his associates, the equivalent of a man's education of, those ancient times. And she was very intelligent, and she would often teach the young men who would come to the library for education. And she unfortunately, due to, typically religious fanatics, of course, those fanatics of any stripe, in our times it's mostly political fanatics, but fanatics, every once in a while, they got to go out there and tear things down, destroy things, burn things down, just so, like little children, everyone knows they're there, and they get their little attention, and they force their bullshit on everybody else, and they don't care what they destroy or who they kill. And one of these morons was spun up, and this resulted in Hypatia being captured, dragged through the streets, either behind a horse or a chariot of Alexandria, and beaten and thrashed and assaulted until she died. All because, how dare she be a woman who's educated, but also, I think in this particular case, not be Christian, right? It's other groups, multiple groups have were offended by the Library of Alexandria at one time or another, or used it, of course, as a horse to beat. Muslim factions destroyed it, assaulted it, and I think ultimately destroyed it. But the early Christian cult of Alexandria was spun up, and it was at their hands, it's my understanding, that Hypatia, well, it was at the hands of a rabid mob, angry mob, but it's that happened more than once in Alexandria. So I recognized this immediately and thought, now wait a minute, what's going on here? And then what emerged, of course, that to me was very curious, was the thing about the wheel. How the wheel was such a prominent part of the expression of who this St. Catherine was. So I made a note of that. But at the time, I went to the historical part. I wasn't aware of the Hekate connection to St. Catherine of Alexandria. So I go there, and you guys have heard the story, those of you who've been watching my channel and reading my books and hearing me on interviews and stuff. I apologize to the noobs that I don't go into greater detail yet, but, I've discussed it a lot elsewhere. I had a weird experience where I asked St. Catherine, so to speak, to show me something. I felt oddly, gently urged or compelled, so to speak, to take a different route home than I normally would have from Riverside. And along that route, I happened to find this old and strange hill with a quarry mined out of a big chunk of it. And between the time I was standing there at this quarry and the time I, ultimately arrived back home, I felt a complete loss of energy, body aches, and had a fever. I realized after I got home I was afflicted, so to speak. And I was afflicted on that Wednesday, and by Friday, I lost natural range of motion. I couldn't turn my head, just as we do at the neck. I had to completely turn my body because the pain and the stiffness from my neck down into my shoulder was too intense. And in spite of that, the next day, the Friday night, I had taken a look at a book. It was Weird California, if you're interested. And there's a little bit in there, an article in there, on the mysteries of Mount Rubidoux, which is a mountain in downtown Riverside, and it's just shy of being a technical mountain, so technically it's still a hill, but it's pretty prominent. Everybody knows about Mount Rubidoux. And if you've read the Empire of the Whale books, you know that I go on to write quite interesting bits about Mount Rubidoux and how it factors in the mystery. But I decide, I get in my head that the next day I'm going to drive over and do something I've never done in my life, despite all the years I've spent here since I was a little kid and back and forth and such. I'm going to take the hiking trail up to the top of Mount Rubidoux. I mean, I really shouldn't have even been driving my car with that lack of range of motion, but I was going to go off on a day hike. Hi-ho, right? So I do this, and you've probably heard me tell the story. I'm in pain. My neck is stiff. I make the walk, which is a couple of miles, and I get to this spot. It's not quite at the top, but it's known as the Peace Tower. Now, it's a kind of a crudely Spanish-style design of a round stone tower with a footbridge that crosses over above the walking path. And, you know, it's a nice little spot. It's very picturesque. I have photos of it in the books. So I'm curious about this. I go up, I cross the footbridge. The footbridge is of a design that, you know, we've seen in Europe, but it also specifically reminded me of the very well-known footbridge in Mostar, Bosnia, which I had spent some time in, just a few years before. So I made that note, and I walk across, and I'm looking at this tower, and at one point I reach up and kind of pull myself up to look inside. It's a medieval kind of thing, so there's these openings, windows. There's no glass or grating in them. They're just kind of open, narrow. And I pull myself up, and I'm looking around. I go, oh, there's a bell inside there. Oh, that's interesting. And I'm looking around, and then that's when it hits me. I realize, wait a minute, my pain is completely gone. I have the full range motion back. Well, again, a lot of people have heard me tell the story. You know, it appears that as easily as I was apparently afflicted on that Wednesday of that week at the quarry, I was then healed at the tower. I know no other way to present that. Now, you can conclude what you want about it, but those are the events. That's how it happened. It's just very weird. It was after I got home from San Francisco, by the way, that the visits from ravens began. And I know the difference between a blackbird and a real crow and a raven. These weren't blackbirds. There's a big old black raven, you know, the long bent beak and everything. And so that had been going on for a couple of weeks. And between this experience of being afflicted and then being healed, and the symbol of the wheel just sticking in my mind, you know, thinking, okay, there's something significant about this, and then the visitations of the ravens. You know, I'm digging around. I'm looking up the symbolism. I still haven't finished writing Latitude 33, the book about Disneyland. I had finished the initial research and stuff. Well, between ravens and the wheel in St. Catherine, naturally, I was led to Hekate. And at that time, I understood Hekate like most people do. Oh my goodness, she's the dark, scary, entity that witches venerate. And I have to tell you, witches for me are a mixed bag. I have a checkered history with ladies who practice witchcraft, okay? I don't provoke, but I don't bow down and kiss those particular asses either. And I think most people that have had these experiences or some experience and certainly done the study would understand that position. Quite frankly, folks, there are people who they project this image of the good-hearted practitioner. Oh, I'm a white witch, and I'm speaking of some, not all. Okay, so nobody get their underpants in a bunch. I'm speaking of particular ones who will use witchcraft in a selfish manner in ways that they should not do. in ways that they themselves will say, oh no, no one should do this, but yet secretly they do. And then of course there is that percentage of people who dabble in witchcraft who are, just doing it to smite someone, right? Because they believe they can get revenge on all their bullies and, somebody who did them wrong or something. And then there's the people who are attracted to the black magic aspects and such. Just like with anything else, just like in ufology, there are people coming from different experiences and different positions and opinions on UFOs and such. You got different personalities in the witchcraft community, right? You do have those people that are harmless and that do things like in natural health and spiritual guidance and stuff like that. I am by no means approving of condemnation of people who practice witchcraft. In fact, you guys know that my opinion of the historical Puritans is generally quite a low opinion. And those who, after England told them to bugger off and Europe said, you ain't coming here, those who chose to come to the colonies and settle in Massachusetts, I despise them and their fanatical, crazy bullshit. Murdering men and women as they did during the Salem witch trials. Come on. Damn. Wow, right? But still, that said, I am not a fan of people who will use witchcraft to control someone emotionally, to gaslight them, to bring forces and entities unwanted into their lives just because that practitioner, either has an axe to grind or covets that person's attention and wants them. Desire can drive some men and women to just think some really stupid things that aren't true and do some things that they really shouldn't be doing. And I am somebody, by the way, who I'm not just a materialist, okay? I do think that there are real paranormal things. I do think the spiritual world is real. I think when people start invoking spiritual forces to intercede on their own behalf, where other people are concerned and those other people are unwitting, okay? I'm not just talking about witchcraft. I'm talking sometimes, there's other forms of prayer is one, but, there's other ways of invoking spiritual forces and ideas, and unbeknownst on a target that you're invoking this, aiming it at or whatever, I take issue with that. Because you are potentially, now I know there's materialists out there that think I'm a fool or whatever. I don't know why you're at the Walter Bosley channel, listening to this particular one, or a lot of things I talk about, if you think all this stuff is bullshit. But that's that's cool. I do things that I write things and talk about things that, don't necessarily require an interest or a belief in those things either. So you're welcome to be here. I think you get my point. That's my way of saying, yeah, I've already opened that door when I'm going there in this discussion. So if it doesn't interest you, or you have no patience for it, you're welcome to stay, but you might not find it interesting. But part of what I take issue with some people who dabble in witchcraft is they do this kind of thing. They do it. It's not just in movies and scary stories. They will do it. They'll do their little spells, their little things. They'll hide their little things, objects, in places, or do their kind of things. And it might not get the result they want, but it could still lead to unpleasant and unwanted experiences on the part of who they are aiming this at. and it's not right. Another issue that I have had, and I have to talk about this stuff because if we're talking about Hekate, we have to address her connection to witchcraft, because she is indeed historically venerated in the witchcraft culture. But I do have to address this, and I like to be honest about my opinion. The other thing that just, it both, it annoys me and it amuses me all at the same time, but I can't tell you how many times I've encountered the smug, all-knowing witch who, knows more than I do about myself and everything I'm experiencing. And of course, they always have a superior knowledge and experience with Hekate, and I'll tell you right now, except with very few exceptions, I want to say 2 people in my entire life so far, okay? And those 2 people are not with us anymore. They passed long ago. Except for those 2 people, I have found that when the smug know-it-all gets real quiet, they've already indicated to you that they might know more about something than you do or whatever, and you kind of call them out on it. When they get real quiet, but they maintain that air of, oh, well, you just don't understand or whatever, I find that they don't know jack shit. They've bluffed, and they got nothing to say because they don't know. And I have encountered that more than once when the discussion of Hekate comes up. Now, I say all this because not that their knowledge of Hekate from the perspective of witchcraft is necessarily wrong or not true from the lore and the tradition, and maybe even the influences. But my experience of Hekate did not come through witchcraft, certainly not through anything that could be traditionally recognized as witchcraft, and reflects far less, if at all, witchcraft than it does I don't know how to put this, a basic esoteric not symbolism. My experience and understanding of Hekate has led to something that had nothing to do with witchcraft or her association to witchcraft per se. So I'm not saying that the witch's experience or knowledge of Hekate isn't. I'm saying it isn't mine. So there is this other way to look at Hekate, to study and understand Hekate, than going through witchcraft. You can understand her, at least to my understanding. It have nothing, and it could have nothing at all to do with witchcraft or darkness or whatever. So, but going back to what I knew about her at the time when I first was learning really more about her and learned that that St. Catherine of Alexandria is actually her. I had that basic knowledge of her, that image of her reputation as being, of this entity from the shadowy entity, Queen of the Crossroads in dark Hades or hell, is the way post-Christ Christians developed and love to talk about even to this day. She's one of the dark figures of hellish Hades, and the witch's venerator, and essentially that fundamentalist view of her is that she's evil. Okay, everything's good and evil, everything's black and white in that sense, and she's dark evil. Okay, Well, I certainly do not have that view of her now, and haven't for a long time, because as I stumbled into what I call the Empire of the Wheel after meeting Ann Walker, the librarian in Fontana, who told me about Cora Stanton, after I just fell headlong down that rabbit hole and began to see Hekate all over it, of course, jumped in and studied Hekate, and then the weird stuff began. Now, you'll recall, if you've heard me talk about the Empire of the Wheel and how the books came about, this was just I was following up on the Disneyland book, okay, because the three Telluric currents, or ley lines as we technically incorrectly call them, but the three Telluric currents which Seshri identified that intersect in Fantasyland, under where the carousel used to sit in Disneyland, they, if you follow that intersection, those lines spread out, they traverse Southern California, and a couple of those head out east, and one of them in particular real closely here to the San Bernardino Valley. So I had just published Latitude 33, and when I met Anne and was jumping into this, and I had talked openly about, in that book, the Tuatha Dé Danann, and at that time, of course, I didn't see that they would pop up and everything. But anyway, I was following up on the Disneyland book and was looking for reports of paranormal stuff associated with the ley line energy that would be passing through San Bernardino. And that's how I found the ghost story about the woman in the store, the red-haired woman, and that's how I found Ann Walker, and on and so forth. And it was just something that was so fascinating and so weird and eerie that it captivated my attention. And it was just a personal investigation for 2 years before I decided that I would write a book. And it was a weird event in my series of events in my life that led to me deciding, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm supposed to write a book about this. Okay, that's a whole story in itself. But I was beginning to have some really weird experiences, specifically with synchronicity. And the more I looked at Hekate, the more weird stuff would emerge, and the more I would get visitations from the ravens, and on and so forth. If you read Confessions of a Spooky Mind, you'll read about some of these weird experiences. If you've heard me talk about it, you'll know about some of the stuff that I've discussed was going on. Now, in the books, we don't talk about it. Rick and I in the first one, and then I wrote the second two, and I don't really talk about the personal experiences in those books, because those books aren't about me. And I have mixed feelings about this popular school of thought where, a journalist, has got to include themselves in the story. I find that to be kind of narcissistic. Sometimes it can work and be done well, but not every time. And as a rule of thumb, as a style of journalism, I hate to tell you, but not a lot of writers out there doing that style of journalism, are successful at it. There's a guy who did a documentary about, somebody in UFO world who I think is full of crap. And, what is it? Somebody timed this right out of the gate. What is it? The first 9 or 11 minutes of the documentary is all this guy, not the subject of the documentary, but the guy making the documentary. It's, the first 11 minutes of his film, or of him, sitting on his cell phone. So, what's that whole show supposed to be about? The subject of the documentary, or, you know what I mean. Hey, monetize your curiosity. Anyway, I digress. So I didn't then. That's why I ended up writing Confessions of a Spooky Mind, because I would tell these stories to people to ask, and that's just the first volume of, you know, if you want to read a book about me, talking about me and my weird experiences, you know, that's the first go-to. And, you know, there will be more because I haven't told all the stories. I'll get around to that. But anyway, weird stuff was going on. And initially, like I said, I started with, you know, Hekate was this dark, scary figure. And I have to tell you, after 7 years of my primary full-time job being investigating the Empire of the Wheel mystery, 7 years of that, I came away with a completely different point of view on Hekate. Much like, you know, to the chagrin of some friends and associates of mine that are so convinced I'm wrong and that they're right about this, much like with Aleister Crowley. Don't get me wrong, I don't have a t-shirt with Crowley's face on it. I don't think I own any of it. Well, I own Moonchild. I own one of his books. But remember, I was a federal agent, a professional investigator, and I truly believe and operate and function as a researcher the way I did as an investigator, and that is objectively. And I came away with a different opinion of Aleister Crowley than I went into all this with. And I stand by my position that Aleister Crowley had really not a goddamn thing to do with what I think are these serial murders. I think it's possible that he was aware that somebody in the world of dark magic was doing something heinous. But, you know, I got a couple of associates who will insist that I've got it all wrong and that he was the mastermind of the whole thing. And I disagree with that. They know I disagree with that. Believe me, they know. And we've agreed to disagree. But anyway, just like you know, my opinion of Aleister Crowley was altered more, you know, to a more objective position, at least where the Empire of the Wheel issue is concerned, I'll say. My opinion and understanding of Hekate wildly changed. So I don't have just the knee-jerk judgmental opinion, and I certainly, you guys know I'm not an atheist. You guys know that I have, you know, stated that if where I have my faith, you know, is in Christ. But as you know, I haven't found a convincing church since I was 12 years old, so I'm not a member of a particular church. That said, I disagree with, you know, some of my associates and friends that are members of churches that, you know, are scholars of theology and stuff. I don't just dismiss figures and beings and entities, you know, by rote or what have you, just because, you know, go team, right? If you're Team Jesus, or more specifically, if you're Team Christ, you know, you can't have any non-judgmental knowledge or interest or opinion of, you know, the players on the other team, okay, so to speak. I'm not that way. I haven't found any church yet that I think has it right 100%, including in their perceptions of themselves and their own understanding. And you'll find that it's usually people that are enthusiastic members of churches who will, you know, criticize that comment and that position of mine. Of course, naturally, you know, they're going to say, oh, you know, heresy, or, oh, you're so misguided. Oh, okay, whatever. I'm just telling you, you know, it goes back to my experience with Hekate. Has had nothing to do with witchcraft or black magic. It's had to do with personal experiences with scholarship, synchronicity, and investigating certain oh, how do I put it? Certain esoteric concepts and principles, and you know, like I said, having weird experiences. And what it ultimately led to, this understanding of Hekate, I've said this before, I'll mention it again. I'm going to, through imagery, present what I've learned ultimately about Hekate in the film that I'm working on, which, by the way, won't be ready till next year. I want to do it right. But it's moving along. These things move slowly. If you've ever worked in independent micro-budget, and believe me, I'm micro-budget. If you've ever worked in micro-budget film, you'll understand how long these things take compared to, you know, movies with much bigger budgets and that employ multiple people and, you know, have the luxury of doing nothing but that for, you know, 4 weeks or however long, 2 weeks, 1 week in some cases. On the level I work, you know, it's going to take me a little while. But in this film, prominently is depicted what I ultimately came to know about Hekate. So that's really the best way for me to put it, is the symbolism in this silent picture I'm doing. I'll let you watch the film and, you know, come to your own conclusions, figure it out for yourself. I'm big on certain things you have to let people figure out themselves, particularly when you have a source that says, you know, when she lifts her veil to show you her truth, tell no one. Okay, what does that mean? That's another way of saying, hey, you know, you're going to find other people who are like-minded, people who are going to understand and, more importantly, appreciate what you're discussing of the things you've learned. But for the most part, most people aren't going to get it. They're not going to care. So, you know, as they say, don't cast pearls before swine, right? And I think that's what tell no one really means. So I choose in this artistic way to demonstrate what I've learned about Hekate. And again, it has nothing, it had nothing, and it certainly has nothing to do with witchcraft or black magic. So I respectfully, you know, usually bow out of the Hekate discussion with my witchy friends, because they can't help it. They're going to come from that perspective. And unfortunately, God bless them, you know, because I consider them friends and friendlies. They're just so smug about it. You know, with that quiet, I understand you and your experience better than you do. I'm like, oh my God, you know. I respectfully disagree with that. But you know, it is what it is, people. It's just like you can't discuss Aleister Crowley with just anybody, you know, because you get a lot of knee-jerk jingoism on that, depending upon, you know, again, what team they're on, so to speak. And I'm not on Team Crowley. I'm just more like the person who walked into the stadium and, you know, watching both teams play the game, and, you know, hey, their pitcher and their outfielders are pretty good, and the pitcher on the other team's pretty good too, you know. But you know, the fans of each team, the diehard fans, oh no, you're not supposed to like anything about the other team, you see. And it's really, when we're talking about religions and stuff in particular, it's really come down to being like, you know, sports, right? You're on this team, I'm on that team. But the stakes are much higher, because I do believe we're talking about real things, real forces. And I, you know, I'm on a team. I just, you know, have my opinions about, you know, what I should and should not do in that regard. But Hekate is, like Crowley, something that I can't discuss with just anyone, between people just not knowing anything about her. Not that that's a judgment on them. It's just, you know, if they have no reason to know anything about this figure Hekate, then they have no reason to know that. But you know, it's between talking with someone who just really doesn't know anything about the subject, or someone who has a very harsh, black and white opinion. There's not a whole lot of people out there you can discuss, that topic with, or others. And that's a reflection. I want to say something about the smug know-it-allism. I've talked about this before in different contexts. That's a problem in our time, in particular. I mean, it's the smug know-it-all behavior has been around since human beings have been around, of course. But it just, I don't know if I'm just noticing it more, or if it does seem to be a fallback for a lot of people. But the cocky, smug, yeah, I know, more than anybody kind of thing. Just not that many people like to truly admit when they don't know something. Now, some people pretend to be admitting that, pretend to be humble, but inside, what they're doing is they're just making an overture just for social reasons. They're not really admitting that they don't know something. I have no problem with admitting if I don't know something. Number one, it's more honest. It opens you up to learning more, and I don't want to make an ass of myself, because when you act all smug, and you don't know what you're talking about, it makes you look like an asshole. And, I don't like making myself look like an idiot. So I would much rather admit when I don't know something, because I'm pretty confident in what I do know. But I won't exaggerate what I do know. It's like with my profession. People hear, oh, Walter Bosley was a guy in national security. He did spook work, and sometimes, something along the lines of how you would describe a commando type pops in, and I'll jump in and correct people. I'll go, no, I was not that. I wasn't a commando type. I was very specifically this. Even, you've heard this in interviews where if a host says Walter's was a former agent of the FBI, I go, no. I was not an agent with the FBI. I was a counterintelligence specialist. And yeah, worked under shallow cover in both positions I had as a counterintelligence specialist. But I was not an agent with FBI. But I worked on the street and did operational stuff, yes. I was a badge-carrying, gun-toting special agent, federal agent of the United States Air Force OSI. And then once I left active duty, I went into counterterrorism. I was not a titled, badged federal agent. I was, let's call it an operational specialist. So I like to be very specific and honest about things I was, and be very clear on what I was not. And as far as things I know and things I don't know, I like to have the same ethic, that is honesty, It's like, it's similar to, think about if you're in a situation, if I had been in a situation in my counterterrorism work, for example, and somebody thrust a weapon in my hand that I had never used before, that I was not familiar with. Well, I'll tell you right now, I'd say, get me to a range or get me out in a safe area as immediately as possible so I can familiarize myself with this weapon. Okay? And I don't care if it's similar, it's same caliber and same class as what I'm what I'm trained in and authorized to carry and experienced in and certified and all that. If a weapon is put in my hand, I want to do some familiarization with it. And to me, that's being professional. Okay? No matter how simple it is. Even if it's a revolver, which is pretty damn simple, I'm going to want to go out and fire off a few rounds and get familiar with that. I'm not going to pretend, oh yeah, I can do it all with anything you put in my hands, because I'll tell you right now, you can get yourself or someone else, not the bad guys, killed because you actually aren't familiar with that weapon. Okay, so when people wonder why I'm such a stickler for don't tell me you know stuff when it's bullshit when you don't know, it's because those are the kind of stakes I'm used to dealing with. Now, it's not just with weaponry. It can be with intelligence. It can be with information that, if you communicate it in the wrong way, or if you, without any effort, just forward something, without looking into it or checking into, it, and you present it confidently. Yeah, that's, that's AAA info there, that you can count on that, and really you've done nothing to confirm that or verify that. That too can have bad results. So what it is your bullshitting can have very bad and sometimes deadly results on your coworkers, okay, or other, innocent people, and can mess things up. So I'm coming from that perspective. So that's why, even if you're talking about barbecue, okay, don't bullshit. If you don't know something, there's no shame in not knowing it. I mean, maybe there's some embarrassment if it's something that you should know, and you've bullshitted all these years or something, or you haven't bothered to know what you should know, but you know what I mean. And I'm speaking mostly to the men, because this is mostly what I'm talking about, a male thing. Men with that cocky, hey, you gotta have that confident know-it-all thing, because that's what the ladies like, and that's what makes you an alpha man. Yeah, I prefer being a Sigma guy myself, but that's another discussion. But yeah, I think you know what I mean. And everybody knows a guy who at some phase of their life would do that shit, or just, that's how they roll, right? That's how they function and operate, and it comes back to bite you on the ass. And that doesn't work for me, So therefore, when I'm pretty good at recognizing it in others when someone's just trying to get, even if it's coming from a benevolent place, trying to get the upper hand. Okay, that's no way to become a friend with me, I'll tell you right now, because I'm seeing it more than you realize. I'm seeing it because, just like a lot of people, you live long enough, you learn how to politely cover your real opinion, of people's behavior or people, right? You just learn how to be polite about those things. So, a lot of times people, I'll tell you what, when you're honest, the way I'm describing, and you admit when you don't know something, there are some dummies out there who interpret that as a weakness, and they underestimate you. And my mentor taught me years ago that it's okay to let some people underestimate you. That works to your benefit. So that then, if they have to learn the hard way that you're not so weak and ignorant as they thought, that works to your benefit. You can impress upon them that they're wrong with greater impact. So, I have learned to, okay, this person thinks, they got the upper hand of gnosis on me. Okay, whatever. They might, but, I've gotten pretty good at detecting, and some people, look, let's be honest, that's a passive-aggressive behavior. And I will tell you right now, you want to be friends with me, do not use passive aggression. Because I'll tell you, among the things in human behavior that I absolutely despise, that's passive aggression. God, I hate that. I'll tell you right now, the minute I suspect it, it pushes me away from someone. I don't like that. I think passive aggression is sleazy. Now, remember, I think there's a difference between um, wielding influence. Influence is a much more honest thing. Okay, the influencer, the benevolent influencer, you know when they're doing it. And they know you know. Okay, you know when they're doing it because they're not hiding it. They're not trying to one-upsman you. Okay, the passive aggressive person, and folks, just like I identified that the pretending to know something you don't know blowhard behavior is pretty much 99% male. Just to be fair and balanced, passive aggression is about 90% mastered by the ladies. Right? Now, you can analyze, right, psychologically or whatever, why men develop the annoying habit of cocksurety and pretending to know when they don't, and women developed their mastery with just underhanded passive aggression, because both sides felt that they had to. I mean, let's not forget, for ages and ages and ages, women could be pushed around and they were second citizens and you know, not treated very well by some societies and civilizations. Not in all cases, but you know, that was a reality. So yeah, women had to develop, you know, to survive in some cases, they had to use these techniques. Same with men. You know, if you have regular guys around these guys who are, you know, hey, I'm the alpha guy, you know, or a big bully or an asshole, just a plain out blowhard asshole, men felt like they had to project this cocksurety, this, oh yeah, I know that, right? Because, you know, the other guys might be judgmental and give them a hard time, blah, blah, blah. So you can see why each sex became, you know, the examples of these particular things I'm talking about. But that said, these are still things to watch out for. It's really cool as a guy when you have, you know, a woman in your life that is a true benevolent influencer. You know, look at all the successful relationships and marriages and stuff, and you will often find that the guy's wife or girlfriend, partner, or whatever, is a benevolent influencer. Okay, the much more honest thing. But passive aggression, that has ulterior motive. It's usually tied into lies. It's dishonest, and it's usually wielded to control. Okay, to control. And to me, yeah, that's sleazy. And the same thing with, now, don't get me wrong. There are men who use passive aggression, and they're basically, they need to be taken out, you know, and they usually do this at women, and they need to be taken behind the barn and, you know, taught a lesson by, you know, real men. But the majority of the way I divided those traits is pretty accurate. So, because I don't respect these things, hollow, fake know-it-allism, and passive-aggressive control, I'm fairly good at recognizing it and suspecting it, and I don't like it. And I have found, when, to bring it back to the Hekate discussion, I have found that the passive-aggressive with a little know-it-allism mixed emerges usually, not in every case, but usually when I'm talking to the folks who are representative of the witchcraft culture, right? The witchcraft demographic. And most of the people I know in that are women. You know, here's what's interesting. This is what's interesting. The representatives, when I'm talking about Hekate, this is specific to discussions of Hekate. When I'm talking about Hekate with a representative from the witchcraft side of the discussion, I'm pretty sure, well, they usually are, and I'm pretty sure that all of them have been female, have been women. And when I talk with Hekate, with someone who is, usually critical of her, and condemning of her, and she's so dark and bad, blah, 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 that has been men, and with the exception of one, all men who consider themselves, Christians and churchgoers, or so the Hekate, I'm not going to say haters, but the Hekate critics, the demonizers of Hekate that I know, are males who come from the religious tradition, and the Hekate know-it-alls, so to speak, who come from the witchcraft, are women who come from the witchcraft tradition. Isn't that interesting, right? How that divides out. And when you look at the history of religion versus witchcraft, isn't that kind of accurate? Now, I mean, we know there's men in witchcraft, duh, but who usually bore most of the brunt of the condemnation of knowledge of these things? But the female witches. Yes, there were some male, practitioners who were, wrongly victimized and stuff by idiot Puritans and their cultural descendants, right up to our times. But it's interesting how, Team Church tends to be the males. And remember, this is all where Hekate is concerned. Keep that in mind. This is where Hekate is concerned. But Team Church has been men. Team Witchcraft has been the ladies. Isn't that interesting? I find that interesting. And that's a discussion in itself. So, anyway, that's all. That's just a little glimpse into, a couple of little glimpses into my becoming acquainted with Hekate, so to speak, my position on Hekate, and my experience in socially in discussing her with others. Now, in my research, to bring it back to the books, of course, I document that. And like I said, she emerges one way or another in all the nonfiction books I've written so far. And I'm curious about this. I'm fascinated with it. What is so pervasive about her role in our existence that she has emerged? Because when I went back and looked at the Disneyland stuff again, there she was. That she had, but what is so pervasive about what she is, who she is, and what her existence means to our existence, that she emerges in a book about Disneyland, in the Three Empire of the Wheel books, in Secret Missions books, which are about Juan Cabrillo, Sir Richard Francis Burton, okay, an explorer, anthropologist, archaeologist, Ambrose Bierce, okay, a Civil War veteran, writer, journalist, who like Juan Cabrillo disappeared and such, and Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, now her emergence with Napoleon Bonaparte is not as full power in the first volume, okay? And as you know, I'm working on volume 2. And I know there's going to be some people that are going to be, I get it, they're going to be cynical and skeptical. I'm not out there looking for a connection to make. What I'm telling you is I have become just relaxed and open and accepting with when she does emerge, and I'm not surprised when she does emerge. I kind of, it gets my attention. I have to laugh to myself a little bit, and I go, oh my God, there she is, I'll be honest with you, with the Ambrose Bierce book, Secret Missions 3, Destination Carcosa, I thought, oh, this might be the first one. That maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's not going to emerge in this one, and I'll be damned, kaboom. There she was. And it had to do with something archaeological. You know, and it very specifically had to do with. Let me get the. Let me see if I can, because it's a photo. As you guys know, I had eye surgery, so the reading skills are not up to speed yet. Let me see if I can find the page, though. There was when I was digging into archaeological topics, potentially relative to Ambrose Bierce, this particular object had a connection to some of the figures in this book, and the object is representative of Hekate, as it turns out. Yeah, let me. I know you can't see me doing this, but I'm going to pull it real close to my eye with a light on it to see if I can get the actual. Yeah, very specifically, it's a relief sculpture. Now, Ambrose Bierce's connection to the crystal skulls his potential connection to the crystal skulls is really a fascinating hypothesis that emerged in the early 1970s. And I have a copy of the book, the pamphlet book that lays it all out. And when you jump into that, you learn about this guy named Burney, Burney. His name was Sidney Burney. And at one point, his shop possessed the legendary F.A. Mitchell Hedges crystal skull. Okay? And there are records to show that he sold the skull to Mitchell Hedges. Okay? If you haven't heard this, there's a gentleman, Nick Nocerino is his name, and he did primary research and investigation and found that the traditional story that, God bless her, Anna Mitchell Hedges used to go around telling about how her father discovered, how she and her father and their team discovered the crystal skull on her birthday at Lubinton, blah, blah, blah. That wasn't a true story, folks. And again, I say God bless her because she meant well, and it was a big part of her life, and it entertained and thrilled a lot of people, but it's not a true story, folks, okay? Look into Nick Nocerino, Nocerino. And, however, this Sidney Burney owned the skull and sold it to Mitchell Hedges, and then after the year that it's recorded that he sold it to them is the first time Mitchell Hedges actually tells this story that Anna, his daughter, used to tell for years, okay? And it was even inserted into later editions of his book, Danger My Ally, his little biography book. In the original editions, nothing in there about the skull was ever, being found that way was ever. In fact, it might not be in that book. It was added to the book about the lost Mayan cities by his associate, and I don't have that book in front of me, so I can't remember his name, but anyway, so Sidney Burney, okay, he's the guy that was the likely source of the crystal skulls. Well, there was this relief sculpture, okay, that came into the hands of Sidney Burney. Oh, by the way, Sidney Burney was Captain Sidney Burney of the, the British Army, and he won the Order of the British Empire, the OBE and such, and the CBE, and was likely an intelligence officer, which that plays into the hypothesis about Mitchell Hedges and Bierce actually working at the same time down in Mexico after Bierce, left the States. Anyway, there was this relief sculpture discovered in Iraq, taken from Iraq, really confiscated, during the 1920s, 20s or 30s. Nothing was known of its origin, but it was not found through an accredited, and I don't mean it was done by people who had no credibility. I mean, it was not found during any known archaeological excavation, any official archaeological excavation, okay? And Burney obtained this relief sculpture from a Syrian art dealer, okay? And that was around, it was in the early 30s, I think around 32 or 33. And it was authenticated, you know, dated and all that. And its origin was unknown, and at the time there was no known record of what the figure in the relief sculpture was called in ancient times. But it is a goddess, and when you look at the picture, she has, let me see if I can see this here with my one good eye. Yeah, it's probably something you've seen before in books, but she is a nude goddess with bird's feet. She has wings, and she's holding an item in each hand, which and her hands are up, and she's standing on what looks like a lion, could be a dog, but on either side of her is an owl. Now, she came to be called the Queen of the Night. So, owls are familiars of Hekate, as we know that, okay? Now, she's holding these two objects in her hands, and she's holding her hands upright. Hekate is often depicted with her hands up, holding torches. And these two items could be lamps, illuminated lamps, okay? Yeah, it is. She's standing. There are two lions. She's standing on the backs of two lions, and lions represent ley lines, ley energy, what we've come to call telluric current, but traditionally ley energy. So she's standing on the back of two lions that are sitting, you know, crossways. Well, what is that? If the lions represent the ley energy, or the lines, and they're crossing each other, that's an intersection. And Hekate is known to stand at the crossroads in the underworld, okay? This is big into what her big secret is. It's a huge clue. And she specifically stands, Hekate stands at a triple crossroad. But this symbolism with the owls, with the crossroad of the ley lines represented in the lions, and the way, you know, they're laying in a cross fashion. And I don't mean like a cross shape, but you know what I mean. And she's standing on them, meaning she's standing at the intersection. This is essential. And the fact that Hekate is known as the queen of the underworld, the queen, you know, she's known as the queen of the night. And, you know, the fact that someone would name her that, I would say they saw the Hekate symbolism all over this. Now, this would, of course, be very representative of the witchcraft perspective. And remember, I want to say this again. I'm not saying that the witchcraft perspective on Hekate isn't true, isn't real. What I'm saying is it's not complete. That's really what I mean to say. The witches know aspects of Hekate, but that by no means is a complete comprehensive description of her. That is by no means what she's all about. Okay? It's merely what she's about as far as the witchcraft culture interprets her. Okay? That's what I want to emphasize. But there is how she emerged in my book about Ambrose Bierce. Bierce is connected by an author in the 70s to the Crystal Skulls and F.A. Mitchell Hedges. F.A. Mitchell Hedges and the Crystal Skull is connected to the Sidney Burney And Sidney Burney, the antique dealer and art dealer, is connected to and for a while possessed the Queen of the Night relief, which I've just described to you, and which is essentially symbolic of aspects of Hekate, obviously. So there is the emergence of Hekate in the Ambrose Bierce story, mystery. And, you know, that's not the only place where Hekate emerges. That's where she emerges overtly within the Ambrose Bierce story and mystery. But let's go back to Bierce's story, from which we get the name of the place Carcosa, and that is his short story, An Inhabitant of Carcosa. And when you read that story, there's afterlife, underworld, Hecate-related symbolism all over that story. So Bierce himself, before he would have, according to this hypothesis, met young Mitchell Hedges, before he would have, according to the hypothesis, had any involvement with these crystal skulls or Sidney Burney or any of that, you know, and by degrees removed, you know, any kind of milieu association to this Queen of the Night Hecate relief, ancient relief, he had written this story, which I, you know, would venture to say very much has Hecate influences in it. Okay? It indicates that, again, there she is, and throughout or through a portion of his life, just like through a portion of our lives, you know. So that's, and then when you look at the themes of the things Ambrose Bierce was interested in, that fascinated him. Remember, I point out in this book that, what was it, he wrote more weird stuff than he wrote Civil War stuff or journalistic stuff. People don't realize that about Ambrose Bierce. They hear about the Devil's Dictionary, you know, they hear about the story that, oh gosh, the Western story. I'm doing a brain dump. Let me see if it's in here. You guys know the one I'm talking about. It's been made into TV shows and movies. An occurrence at, is it the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge? Well, you know, there you go. There's Owl Creek. You know, an owl is the most known familiar of Hecate, right? If I'm getting that right. The title, right? He wrote more weird stuff. So again, the realm of Hecate influenced Ambrose Bierce's literary visions pretty clearly, you know. Now, remember, Robert W. Chambers would go on to be influenced by Bierce's story, and he would borrow the place name of Carcosa for his legendary King in Yellow collection, which became such a tremendous influence on authors of horror and more particularly weird literature to this very day. I talk about in the Bierce book, you know, its obvious influence on one of the greatest TV dramas in the history of television, and that, of course, is True Detective Season 1. You can forget about the other two. Let's hope, and I'll discuss in the future, that Season 4 might bring us back into the realm of the perfection that is Season 1, but because, of course, we know there is direct reference to the mysterious Yellow King in True Detective Season 1 and Carcosa and all that, so clearly the creator and the writers were very much influenced by Chambers and the Yellow King stuff, and Chambers in turn was influenced by Ambrose Bierce. And I credit Ambrose Bierce with really being the creator of the type of stories that we have, that Rod Serling so expertly put a great name to, and that's Twilight Zone. Okay? When you say Twilight Zone, you immediately understand the type of story that you're talking about, right? Thanks to Rod Serling. But Ambrose Bierce, as near as I can tell, in American literature, is the first to really, really capture and put down, even more than Poe and Washington Irving, what we call the Twilight Zone kind of story. And he was fascinated with the other side. He was fascinated with weird things. I dare say, to me, it's obvious that he was fascinated with Hecate's realm. And for him to have disappeared is just so wonderfully delicious when you think of these things. Now, Ambrose Bierce scholars, the known ones, there's one in particular who's really bad about this, but they tend to be, I don't want to say snobs, but that's not what I'm saying. There's one out there that's kind of like the self-appointed expert and gets his ass kissed by, his sycophants and all that. But just like the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid experts, they don't want to hear anything but the standard, traditional, biography of Ambrose Bierce. They don't want to hear any other interpretations but ultimately their own. And what is, agreed upon by consensus of, the people that just, the standard biography. So, I know one of them just absolutely holds Destination Carcosa in utter disdain. I'm proud of that, just as I'm proud of, pissing off the Butch, Sundance, and Etta Place traditionalists, the trads, with my hypothesis on Sundance and Etta. I'm proud of how much that irritates them, because my view is, I learned this in my profession. I learned this from my mentor, and I believe in this. Pull your head out of your ass and think outside the box. Here's the value of that. The hypothesis which pops your head out of your ass and has you step outside the box may in itself not turn out to be true. But guess what? By stepping outside of that box, you may very well find the additional evidence you need that you didn't know before, which could in turn come back and further verify your inside the box thing. So you see, there's always a value in looking outside the box. I learned this as a criminal investigator, in particularly an investigator of something so arcane as a spy case. Okay, talk about a lot of counterespionage cases and investigations. You don't know who you're looking for. You just know there is a spy in there, right? It's a similar dynamic. So you have to think outside the box, and it would be it's similar dynamic when going after a serial killer, I would think, because you've got to think outside the box. So this is what I say to these biographical trads, when it comes to, especially to Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid and Etta Place, and also in particular to Ambrose Bierce. Okay, step outside the box. Allow yourself to consider the wilder possibilities, because there may be even more evidence to further strengthen your position. So that's always a good thing, to find evidence, right? In my opinion. And anyway, to bring it back, what I'm supposed to be talking about here, that is how, through the relief sculpture Queen of the Night, look it up, that is how she emerged in my Ambrose Bierce research. And I present that in the book, Ambrose Bierce and the Empire of the Wheel. Secret Missions 3, Destination Carcosa is the title. You can find all my books at lulu.com. But, so we have Hekate emerging. Oh, to go back to the Juan Cabrillo book, remember, oh gosh, let me jump back to that. How does Hekate emerge in the Juan Cabrillo book? Well, how does Hekate emerge in the Juan Cabrillo book? Directly through her symbolic connection to Catalina Island, for starters. Indirectly, by the possible and I say possible, all hypothetical speculation, it's speculative, a possible connection of the mysterious and missing to this day sword of Joan of Arc, a connection, some association of that sword to Juan Cabrillo and possibly his disappearance. And folks, if you don't know the story, I have to say Secret Missions 1 in some ways is as much about Joan of Arc as it is about Juan Cabrillo in some ways. If you're not familiar with the details of the story of Joan of Arc, oh boy, Hekate is at the very heart of it. In a nutshell, Joan of Arc claimed to be in touch with 3 saints, 3 entities, 3 saints. Mostly one in particular who was giving her the primary directions of what she was supposed to do, that led to her leading the French army and led to her becoming this national hero, and ultimately led to her being captured and killed by church fanatics and British elites, elites from England. And that, now remember, well, before I say that, that one entity, which was really the main one giving her instructions, was our friend St. Catherine of Alexandria. Yes, folks, Joan of Arc, Saint Joan as some know her, a good French Catholic, right? She was taking orders from St. Catherine of Alexandria. Joan of Arc was taking instructions and orders from the goddess Hekate. As I said earlier, there was no such thing as St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Catherine of the Wheel. Joan of Arc identifies her specifically. And I go into this in the book. Joan of Arc was directly, according to her, directly interacting with Hekate. Hekate is the one that told her where to find the sword, buried behind the altar in the church of Firebois, okay, where, according to a researcher named Lance Bernard, who's written a fascinating report on the sword of Joan of Arc and the sword of Charles Martel, according to Lance Bernard, Charles Martel had buried the sword behind the altar of the Church of St. Catherine of Alexandria at Firebois. So we have this one bit of research that says Martel buries this special sword, which, by the way, was fashioned from a meteorite that had fallen the night before the big Battle of Tours. Okay, look it up, Tours. And there's a lot of symbolism there I go into in the book. But this special sword is forged. He becomes victorious when he really shouldn't have been. A lot of that's through a comedy of errors, too, when you read both accounts, both sides of that battle. But still, he came out victorious and is credited with being, one of those saviors of Western Europe during those times. And he buries the sword behind the altar at a church essentially named for Hekate. Think about that. The St. Catherine of Alexandria Church at Firebois. F-I-E-R-B-O-I-S. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Firebois, perhaps. There's not an E on the end, so Firebois. So, this is where, 700 years later? Something like that? This is where St. Catherine of Alexandria, a.k.a. Hekate, tells young Joan to go find the sword. And she does. Now, I want you to think about something. Hekate, okay, she stands specifically at a triple crossroad. She is known as the triple-faced goddess. Whereas she has an association to the number 100, her number specifically is 3. So here you have Joan of Arc, who's in contact with, she says, with 3 saintly entities. So there's Hecate's number to begin with. And the lead of those three, which is really egging her on and giving her instructions and such, is Saint Catherine of Alexandria, or Hekate. So there's where Hekate big time emerged in my Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California, or Secret Missions 1, in that research. So there's that one. And then, of course, I just went over how she emerges in the Bierce book. Okay? Now, in Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, she does another subtle emergence, or small, brief emergence, if you will, early in Burton's young adulthood. When Burton is attending Oxford, he is spending a lot of time with and at the library of, they have multiple colleges, and let me see. Again, I apologize. Until I get both eyes fixed, the looking for stuff in books is kind of sometimes feels impossible. But let me find if there's a picture, or at least the name, because I want to get these names correct. So if you look for it in the book, or in here we go. It's chapter 2, which I titled The Recruit, and Burton. Let me find it here. Bear with me. Thank you for your patience. Oh, by the way, Burton might have been related genealogically through his mother to the infamous Guy de Rays. Look up Guy de Rays. I talk about him in this book, Secret Missions 2. Guy de Rays was the guy who was accused, arrested, and put on trial for allegedly sexually molesting, and then is a serial murderer of young males, and doing all sorts of allegedly horrible things. And Guy de Rays, as it turns out, served in Joan of Arc's army. Okay, no reflection on Joan, but Guy de Rays was a member of Joan of Arc's army. Okay, and he was very much into alchemy and the summoning of demons and stuff, according to his critics and accusers at the time, and that's possibly through his mother's side. Now, let me see if I can get to the point where we're back at Oxford with him, and I can, when he's at Oxford, his tutor is a guy named William Greenhill. William Greenhill was an associate of, let's see, he had an association to William Blake, so consider that. I'm sorry. Through Greenhill, he meets John Varley. That's what it is. And Varley was a close friend of William Blake, so there was his connection. And Varley's the one, by the way, who taught Burton the Kabbalah, introduced him to Kabbalah, and first taught him Kabbalah. So he's already hanging out, right, with occult mystics and such. And he, while at Oxford, let me find this. While at, let me see. Oh gosh, again, I apologize, you guys. It's because at present I'm not able to. You will find, if you haven't read Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, I think you would find it very interesting. And I found what I was looking for. Let me see. That's right. Burton he was at Oxford University, but he specifically attended Trinity College. And Trinity College is right next door to Balliol College. Balliol, B-A-L-L-I-O-L. I think it's Balliol College. Okay? Now, what's interesting is he had a close proximity to Balliol and also interacted with some of the guys who went to Balliol. One of whom was Benjamin Jowett. Okay? Not only was he a resident of Balliol College, he would eventually become the master of Balliol College. Now, why is this significant? One of Burton's good friends, Benjamin Jowett, a student himself of Balliol College, and eventually becomes the master of it. Why is this important? Well, guess what? The patron saint of Balliol College is, you guessed it, Saint Catherine of Alexandria. So Burton is there, going to Trinity College. He's got close physical proximity to and social connections to Balliol College, whose patron saint is Hekate. So there is how Hekate emerged in an overt way in Burton's story. It's just uncanny how she just pops up. Let me see if I can try and read this. Now, as far as skullduggery goes, if you've studied the history of espionage, you know that both Cambridge and Oxford, okay, were and remain so popular grounds for recruitment into the British spy world, right? And certainly Burton was involved in that and was likely recruited while at Oxford into that. But he had also at the same time very much the opportunity to advance his esoteric education. Now, I go into this in the book, Secret Missions 2, on Burton. His childhood, because of the influence of his father, his childhood exposed him, and his youth, his years of youth, exposed him to all manner of esoteric and really even occult type of scholarship, information. So the appetite was already whetted for that in him. And so by the time he gets to Oxford and he's, learning the Kabbalah and hanging out with guys like Varley and William Blake and this master at Balliol College and all, and the stuff that goes with it, I mean, it becomes obvious that, he would continue in these kinds of interests. And it should be no surprise that there is Hekate, in the middle of it. And look, I'll say this. It would take, when you consider the context of Oxford and, the kind of men we're talking about who attended there and were, involved in all this stuff, I imagine there weren't a whole lot of attendees, residents of Balliol College who didn't know that St. Catherine of Alexandria was Hekate, okay? I'm sure, and I would venture to say that any of them that Burton learned or shared an enthusiasm and interest in occult sciences and stuff like that, I'm sure those guys in particular knew exactly who their patron saint was, and I would venture to say that might be why she was chosen as the patron saint of Balliol College. I mean, that's a whole discussion in itself. So, but I talk about that in Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, but there she is. And then we come to Napoleon Bonaparte. And as I said, Hecate's emergence so far in Volume 1, in my opinion, is more subtle than these other examples I've given you from the other books. And I'll put it this way, I will not be surprised if she emerges a little more prominently in the research that I'm continuing for Volume 2. So I wouldn't be surprised. The Tuatha De Danann are certainly, just as they are in all the other books, they're certainly present in this book, because if you've heard me talk about my Napoleon research, then you know that he was all about his fascination with the forgotten technologies of the lost civilizations. Okay, so there's your Tuatha De Danann field of presence, influence. But the Hekate emergence in this is a little more subtle, and it comes through in Napoleon's time in Egypt, and in the man who ends up living in Brazil. Let me see if I can find this guy's name for you. Okay, this might be it right here. Yes, General Dirk van Hoggendorp. Now, he was living by himself in a little house on Mount Corcovado. Okay, he had spent time in the Dutch East Indies, and he spent time in Java, and he ended up in Brazil. And in his bedroom, his walls were painted black and decorated with images of skeletons. That's just now Hoggendorp met Napoleon in 1810. He became an ambassador. Okay, Napoleon and he hit it off immediately. Okay, Napoleon loved this guy. But I go into why Hoggendorp would have been important to my hypothesis on Napoleon, regarding Brazil and South America. But Hoggendorp had some interest and, demonstrated, suggestively that he was as much into knowledgeable of occult sciences. And one of the clues we have is that bedroom, the black walls with the images of skeletons. Why? What does that have to say about Hekate? Well, she's the queen of the night, the goddess of the underworld, the queen of the crossroads, right? And she is who you encounter after you die and enter the underworld in the afterlife in your processing portion, right? After you shuffle off this mortal coil. So, and this is where a lot of the dark symbolism of Hekate comes from, is because of her association with the after-death underworld. Black walls with skeletons all over that. Well, what is that? Thematically, that is, related to death, to the other side. And so that's what I'm saying is the suggestion, the hint of Hekate in that is very subtle. So that's what I'm saying. Her emergence in Volume 1 of my Esoteric Napoleon, which is technically, remember, it's Secret Missions for the Esoteric Napoleon, Volume 1 in this case. That's why I'm saying her emergence is subtle, but you have to, between that and the weird things that happen, the weird thing that happened to Napoleon while in Egypt, and the prominence of the Great Pyramid and its mysteries in Napoleon's time in Egypt, and Hecate's well-known connection to ancient Egyptian magic. I mean, the name of their magic, Hekate, comes from her name, okay? because the way her name is spelt in more ancient traditions is with a K, not with a C. It's Hekate. Okay, and in Egyptian magic is Hekat. Now these, of course, are translations, but you get the idea. So again, her emergence in my Napoleon research so far has been a little more subtle, a little subdued, but I've only done the first volume of Secret Missions 4. Now in Secret Missions 5, oh God, I go into that. Let me go grab that. Secret Missions 5. This is the one that I came out with about a year ago. And this is one that doesn't have any illustrations. Oh, you'll have to forgive me for that, because I was still recuperating from chemo when I worked on this book. But let me see if my weakened eye, I can't wait to get the other eye fixed, folks, I gotta tell you, so I can get back into reading. But when you talk about Hekate, of course, in Secret Missions 5, I follow up with my Juan Cabrillo research and talk about Joan of Arc a little bit more. So Hekate is naturally discussed in that. But, technically that's an expansion on my research from a previous book. So that's not like a fresh emergence, so to speak. Let me see here. And again, I apologize for making you kind of sit there and wait. So she's well, let's just say this about the 5th book. Naturally, discussion of her comes up again, and there is a discussion of the legends of the ancient Amazons, who, again, according to the legend, had their kingdom, possibly, I argue, and others have argued, in California. Okay? Ancient, prior to the known history in California. And in discussing that, some Hekate-related themes emerge. Okay? And the symbolism in that. And then also, when discussing some really creepy things relative to discussing disappearances in Yosemite National Park, Hekate emerges again because of the symbolic crossroads. In other words, the intersections of the telluric currents relative to, in particular, to disappearances that have been documented there. And in that, I reference the excellent and very intriguing work of David Paulides in his Missing 411 series. And there's been other people since then who have, picked up that gauntlet and gone with it as well. But because of the intersections which Sechery identifies there, again, we have a subtle emergence of Hekate there. And not just in that, in the context of multiple things discussed in Veiled Destinies. But because Veiled Destinies, the nature of it, of this book, it's a book that kind of, I wanted to do this, it's the 5th volume of the Secret Mission series. It's a kind of a, I don't want to say a comprehensive guide, but you could almost read Veiled Destiny Secret Missions 5 first and then go back and read books 1 through 4. Okay, because it fills in the gaps between the 4 individuals I've written about so far, some of the historical gaps that are relative to the context of the research of these books. And it also presents a whole lot of new information. But you could say that that Hecate's presence is felt through the whole thing, and you get more overt glimpses of her through the book. But my point is, there she is throughout all my Secret Missions series. And you know, I'm not done with that series by any means. I'm already pretty sure who the next book is going to be about. Now, when I say the next book, I am going to be coming out with Secret Missions 4, Esoteric Napoleon Volume 2, before I come out with Secret Missions 6, okay? Just so we can keep that in order. I do have the follow-up to Napoleon to come out with, and boy, you guys, it's a doozy already. Just as I'm not done with the Secret Missions series, I'm sure I'm not done with Hekate. As I said, I'm depicting her in my new film that I'm working on. And because she's been so prominent in other experiences that I've had that have, you know, they're not talked about in these particular books, she's just there, okay? And it's something I'm not supposed to ignore, in my opinion. The only time I have what you'd call communicated to her was that first time when I knew her as St. Catherine of Alexandria, and I was in that rose garden at the Citrus Park, and I said, show me something. Since then, I have never directly communicated with her. These are potentially risky and dangerous things to do. There's a difference between acknowledging the presence, okay, of someone or something and actually communicating to them. All right, there's a difference, and it's not disrespectful to that personage, that entity, to not communicate directly, okay? But these are, in my opinion, in the traditions that I have been brought up in, understand, and have learned about, and in my studies and in my personal experiences, these kinds of things are potentially dangerous. It is, you know, just willy-nilly, you know, through cocksurety or passive-aggressive self-convincing that you are a know-it-all, you know, so therefore you can handle the direct, you know, that Walter, he might not be able to handle it, but I can. Be careful with that. Be careful with that. That's all I'm saying. It's like handling, the way I look at Hekate is she's like electricity, right? Electricity is an amazing tool, right? An amazing source of power and energy, and our entire civilization is dependent upon the use of electricity. But what else is it? It's deadly dangerous. You mishandle electricity and it kills you. It does not care. Okay? So there's, you know, my advice is to handle your experience with these things or with her like you would handle electricity. Be very careful and don't get cocky with it. So, anyway, I just wanted to talk about that and those books, because I will tell you, I have enjoyed immensely doing the research and the writing of this Secret Missions series. I mean, I've written more Secret Missions books than I have any other of my nonfiction research, and there's more to come. And I really enjoy them. I enjoy the research, genuinely, sincerely, and honestly, one book has led to another. Okay? I have never at any time sat down and said, okay, I need to crank out another Secret Missions book. I'll just pick someone. No. When I started with Secret Missions 1, it's not, you'll find it doesn't say Secret Missions Volume 1 in the book, okay? It became by default Secret Missions Volume 1 because I ended up writing the Burton book. Okay? And while researching and working on the Burton book, Bierce and the weird things about Bierce emerged. And I set it aside. And then months later, I said, okay, I've really got to dig into this. And ultimately, it's like, okay, this has got to be in the Secret Mission series. And, Napoleon as well. So that's how my books in general, my nonfiction books, and in particular the Secret Mission series, that's how that's worked, folks. One of my research, it's honestly, I'm pulling threads, I'm following my line of research and investigation, and one book has legitimately led to the other. I do not crank out things just to have something out there. I'm proud of that, and I think you see that it makes the books genuine and sincere, and you may disagree with some of my hypotheses and my conclusions, and that's okay. But I think you'll find them interesting, and if you find this whole Hekate discussion interesting, check out the Secret Missions books. Again, available print on demand at lulu.com. That's the only place you'll find them. There we go. So, my gosh, I've gone on. This is 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I think that's enough Walter Bosley at any given time for anyone. And so I'm going to end it right here. And if you gave a couple of your hours to listen to this, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And, check out the live stream every Sunday afternoon. And I'll talk to you again.